This all goes to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, my obeisances. So today we'll honor the occasion. This is the title. It's titled Bhismastami. It's a day where we honor grandfather Bhishma. I'll speak a little bit about his life as today's topic of discussion. Okay.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Yeah, let me see here. Let me try it. All right, now I'm set. Okay, it seems like we only have a few online today so far. We can begin with the invocation. Om Agyan Timidandasya Gyanajana Salakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimakti Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavari Pastyatya De Satarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the first canto, chapter number 9, it talks about the passing away of grandfather Bhishma, which is being heralded by great sages and even Krishna himself as being truly wondrous and truly auspicious. Before we get into describing his departure, we want to give a little background of this great personality and how he wound up in the position that he performed in his activities in this material world. In the heavenly planets, there are a group of demigods called the Vasus. And there are 8 Vasus. They associate together. One day when they were together, they happened to see this sage who was quite deformed. And they started to joke and make fun of the sage. The sage became very irritated and unhappy. And so he cursed them. He cursed them to all fall to the material world. And so they were forced to come to the material world from the heavenly realm. Well, this is another level of material world, is the heavenly realm, but this is a lower level where there is a lot of distress on this level, as opposed to in the heavenly realms where there is many glorious, or what we say highly elevated forms of material happiness that can't compare to anything on this planet. It's not a place that devotees look for as a goal, but it is seen as the best of all material situations. The only problem is it's very hard to become Krishna conscious there because of too much material opulence. Anyway, they fell from their realm into the material world. Now, when they were cursed, they met another sage whose name was Vashishta. And Vashishta, they prayed to Vashishta, please, somehow or other, free us from this curse. He said, well, I can't free you from the curse, but the 7 of you will only live in the material world for 1 year, and you'll be back in your position here in the heavenly planets. But one, his name was Diyu, D-Y-U, Diyu, he will have to stay on the earthly realm and take up material activities. He will live as a king without a kingdom, and he will also be a great proponent of religious principles. So one day, one particular king, his name was Shantanu, very powerful king. He was out hunting in the forest, and he saw this beautiful, beautiful girl. Immediately, his mind became attracted, and he decided to propose marriage, which he did. She agreed for the marriage, but she said, I will marry you only if you adhere to one of my conditions. He said, what is that? That anything I do, you don't question. Pretty difficult statement, because that could take a wide range of possibilities, but he agreed. And so they got married. This personality that he married was actually the personification of Mother Ganges herself. She was the living Ganges personified. And so after some time, a child was born, a male child. Immediately after the birth of the baby, she took the baby and threw it in the Ganges. Shantanu was a little concerned why his wife was throwing the child into the, but then he had agreed never to question anything she did. So he remained silent. And then this happened continuously for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children. Finally, when the 8th boy was born, she was about to throw him in the Ganges. And he said, stop, I can't take this anymore. Why are you doing this? You're taking our children and throwing them into the Ganges River. She said, thank you very much. It was nice knowing you. Here, this one is yours. I am going. And she left and returned to her abode in the heavenly planets. That person grew up to be known as Devavrata, the king's son. And he was a very powerful personality. And he was actually going to become the heir to the throne to his father. His father was actually the king of the earth at the time. So he had a very powerful position ahead of him. Now his father, as a king, was without a consort. And so one day when he was out, he met this daughter of a fisherman. Her name was Vegavati. Immediately he fell in love with her. But then, thinking that before he could marry her, he needed to get permission. So he asked her who she was and whose daughter she was. And he said, I am the daughter of a fisherman, and my father lives just here. So he went, the king himself went to the fisherman and said, your daughter has agreed to marry me, only it is important that you give permission, otherwise it won't happen. He said, well, I know you're the king of the world and you are very powerful, and this is a very grand opportunity for my daughter, but you already have a son. And so if you marry my daughter, the child of that of my daughter will not take the throne. Therefore, your son will become the king. I cannot allow it. So he refused. So King Santana was despondent. He went back home. And after some time, his son, Devabrata, said to his father, I can see, my dear father, you are very morose. Why is that? So he explained the whole situation. He wanted to marry this daughter of a fisherman, but the fisherman would not give permission, only because that he, Devabrata, would be the next king. And he wanted his son to be the king. And so Devabrata, very, very concerned about the happiness of his father, went to the kings and went to the fisherman and spoke and said, my dear fisherman, I agree to not take the throne. I will give your son the throne. The fisherman said, very nice, but there is still one problem. What is that? Well, you'll marry, and then your son will be the heir to the throne. Therefore, the daughter, the son of my daughter, will not be the king. So then Devabrata thought what to do to make his father happy by giving him a chance to get married with this daughter of the fisherman. So he said, and this is very powerful statement he made, which was completely against anything Kshatriyas would ever do. He said, my dear fisherman, I agree not to get married. As soon as he said that, a voice from the sky said, Bhishma, Bhishina, Bhishima, which means terrible vow, terrible vow. And so the fisherman agreed. Okay, you have agreed not to get married, therefore my son will become the king. And so he went home and informed his father. His father was surprised that he had made such a vow, because for a Kshatriya not to get married is completely unheard of. But he did it just to please his father. His father said, you have sacrificed so much for me, therefore I give you a benediction that you can only die when you want to die. No force on earth can cause your death, only your own choice. So he blessed him with the privilege of choosing to die whenever he wanted to. King Satana was quite powerful. So he married Begavati, and there were two children born to Begavati. One was Chitrangada, and one other. Chitrangada took the throne, but right after he took the throne, after Santanu, a Gandharva became envious of him because he had the same name. And therefore the Gandharva challenged him to a fight and killed him. And now there was no king on the throne. This happened right after him taking the throne. The other son wasn't qualified because of his sickly nature. He could not take the throne. Bhishma now was thinking how to satisfy his mother, who was concerned. And so she said, well, we have to find a wife for the other son. Actually, yeah, the other son needed a wife. So he went to a particular sacrifice where 3 girls were going to get married, and he captured all 3 of them, Ambika, Amba, and Ambalika, and Ambava. And he brought them back. Amba had already been promised to Shava. And so she said, I am already promised to Shalva, so you cannot take me. So he returned her. So the other two, they married to this one king. And then again, there was some problems with children, as the children born to them were, that later became, I can't remember all the details of the particular pastime, but anyway, they weren't allowed to have children for some reason. So there was still no heir to the throne. So Begavati, the stepmother of Bhishma, said that, you must marry, because if you don't marry, there will be no heir to the throne, and how the kingdom has to go on. And this is religious principles. How can we, after explaining so many reasons why he should get married, he said, well, actually, I have made this vow. And he strongly protested that when a Kshatriya gives his word, then that is law. And he said, if a Kshatriya breaks their law word, that is more condemnable than death itself. Better to die than to break one's word. And so his mother could see his determination, and she didn't push it anymore. And then somehow or other, Vyasadeva came into the picture. This is a whole long story. But eventually, Amba, who was sent back to Shalva to get married, he rejected her because she had been captured by Bhishma. And he said, you go back to him. He is your actual husband. But when she went back to him and she asked him, well, I can't get married now because my husband won't accept me because I've been, touched by you. He said, well, I have taken a vow not to marry. So she became angry and she went to Lord Shiva and she prayed to Lord Shiva. And then Lord Shiva said, well, actually, you have to take birth. You have to give this body and you have to take birth as a male. And she did. She performed those penances because she wanted revenge against Bhishma. And she took birth as Sikundi. And Sikundi was actually on the battlefield on the Pandava side, fighting against the Kurus, which was the side by which Bhismadeva took. And Bhismadeva wouldn't fight against Sikundi because he knew Sikundi was a woman in her previous life, and therefore Kshatriyas don't fight with women. So he was seeing that she was actually, he wasn't sure if she was male, female, or eunuch. So, but he rejected the idea of fighting with her. And so he avoided fighting with her as much as possible. When she attacked him, she became he would always somehow or other avoid the battle with Sikundi. Now, later on, of course, Bhishma's life became very glorious in so many ways. Later on, he took the side of the Kurus against the Pandavas. Although he was the grandfather of many of the Pandavas. In fact, all of the Pandavas were raised by Bhismadeva in so many different ways. He took care of them as his own sons. He had great affection for the Pandavas, especially for Yudhisthira and Arjuna. But then again, he took the side of the Kurus. And why is that? And sometimes we get to the question, well, if he was such a great devotee and he had so much affection for the Pandavas, why did he fight the war against the Pandavas? And the answer is interesting. There is two reasons. There's the external reason, apparently, which everyone knows, is that Bhishma had no connection with anything. He had no employment. And so in order to give him some opportunity to act out his role as a Kshatriya, Duryodhana lured him to come on his side by saying that he would maintain him and make him the commander-in-chief of the armies. And Bhismadeva accepted that. Now that was the external reason. Now you might say, well, he seems to me to make a compromise. But actually the internal reason sort of gives everything clear. And what is that internal reason? Is that he took the fight against Krishna and the Pandavas just to teach a lesson. Because grandfather Bhishma was so powerful, he could annihilate the entire Pandava army by himself. He was such a powerful warrior, and he also had that benediction not to die until he actually wanted to die. And so he was never fighting at his capacity, because if he were to fight at his capacity, there would be no chance for the Pandavas. So one time, Duryodhana said to Bhismadeva, I'll get to the reason after a while. Bhismadeva, I can see, my dear grandfather, you're very sentimental and you're very inclined to the Pandavas. When you're on the battlefield, you're not fighting to your capacity. And now Bhismadeva felt somewhat insulted hearing these words from Duryodhana. And so he said, all right, tomorrow I will eliminate the 5 Pandavas. And I have 5 arrows here, and each one of these arrows will kill one of the Pandavas. Duryodhana was elated. But Duryodhana said, actually, let me keep those arrows for you. And tomorrow when the battle begins, I will return the arrows. So Duryodhana, he gave him the arrows. Now, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the super soul in the hearts of all living entities, who was aware of everything, could understand what was going to happen to the Pandavas. So he came to Arjuna. He said, Arjuna, don't you remember that actually Duryodhana owes you a favor? So I think it's time now to collect that favor. So he has 5 arrows. Go to Duryodhana and ask him to give you those 5 arrows. So Arjuna went. He was greeted, because the Kshatriya Dharma is that they fight during the day, but in the evening time, after the sun sets, there is no fighting, and they all sit together and they talk. Soldiers from both sides. It's not like today where everybody hates everybody so much and they just kill everybody and throw bombs and nobody knows who's doing anything, and it's all secret, and women and children get killed, and it's just, it's not warfare, it's just animal fighting. But Kshatriya Dharma means they follow rules and regulations that are set within the scriptures for proper execution of battle. And so at the evening time, they would be friends and talk. But during the day, they would fight like bitter enemies. So Duryodhana was visited by Arjuna. Arjuna said, Duryodhana said, oh, you've come. Yes, I've come. I have, do you remember? You have given me a little promise that anything I want you could give. Duryodhana said, yes, whatever you like. And he named him many things that he could give him. Arjuna said, actually, what I came for is I came for those 5 arrows you're keeping for Bhishma. Oh, okay. So he had promised. Again, Kshatriyas, when they promise something, they keep their word no matter what, even if it's against their best interest. So he gave the 5 arrows to Arjuna. The next day, when grandfather Bhishma came to Duryodhana, he could understand this was the trick of Krishna. And so, in the next day, Bhismadeva was fighting really fierce, and Arjuna was there with Krishna on the chariot. And Bhismadeva was shooting arrows so fast, and these arrows were so powerful that it was smashing the entire chariot that Krishna was on driving and Arjuna. And so finally the wheels broke, the chariot fell apart, and Krishna and Arjuna fell to the ground. At that point, Krishna knew that if he didn't come and do something, then Arjuna would be finished. So Kontiya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, those who are my devotees, they are never vanquished. I always give protection to my devotees. Now, Krishna had promised to restrain from fighting. During the agreement earlier on, just before the battle actually started, Krishna offered Arjuna and Duryodhana either himself or his armies. Duryodhana took Krishna's armies and Arjuna took Krishna. But Krishna says, whoever takes me, I'm not fighting. But Arjuna said, oh, you're not fighting, but at least you can drive the chariot. And so Krishna agreed to serve his devotee in that way. It's interesting because such an intimate relationship between Krishna and Arjuna, where Krishna could be ordered by Arjuna to drive the chariot. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He gives orders, but in that friendly, loving relationship between him and Arjuna, he accepts the instructions or the order of Arjuna as a friend would accept a gift from another friend. But then when the chariot was smashed and Arjuna looked like he was finished, Krishna jumped up, grabbed the chariot wheel and ran full speed towards Bhismadeva. And there was a fight. And Krishna ran, it's described that he ran so fast that his charter got caught in the wind and flew off his body, but he kept running anyway. And of course, Bhismadeva, seeing his worshipful Lord, thinking, now I will leave my body being killed by Krishna himself. This is the most wonderful experience. This is the most wonderful reward can be attained by a Kshatriya. There is nothing more greater than to be killed by Krishna on the battlefield and attain to the spiritual world. So Bhismadeva was so happy. And then, of course, there was a fight. And during that time, Arjuna was firing arrows at Bhismadeva while Bhismadeva was shooting arrows at Krishna. And it says that Krishna was accepting those arrows as a lover accepts the love bites of his beloved. No, it's a very sweet. This was Vishwanath Chakravarti. No, actually not Vishwanath. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives this commentary on this particular exchange between Bhishma and Lord Shri Krishna. Of course, now Arjuna was shooting arrows and Bhishma's body was filled with arrows, and ultimately he could no longer fight. But he didn't give up his body. He simply laid on the battlefield. And he stayed for 18 days on the battlefield. That's nicely described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And during that time, it was obvious that the Pandavas had won the war. And the war was already over and King Yudhisthira had gotten the throne. Now this was very pleasant for Bhismadeva to hear that the Pandavas actually had gotten the throne. But Yudhisthira was not happy, thinking that because of me, so many soldiers have died, so many women are without husbands, so many daughters are without fathers, and uh, so many sisters are without brothers. So he was just lamenting the amount of carnage in that war. 640 million soldiers on the battlefield, and only a handful survived that war. It was the greatest war in the history of wars. But it was Dharma Yudya. It was fought on religious principles because Krishna was personally there conducting the whole scene to make sure that the Pandavas would ultimately become victorious. But Yudhisthira was despondent, and so Krishna arranged for Yudhisthira to meet Bhishma before he departed the world and hear from him the duty of a king once they achieve the office of ruling. And so he instructed him, and that's a beautiful instruction. For 18 days while he was laying on the battlefield, he instructed, and he also gave his darshan to many great souls, including Krishna himself. It's a very beautiful scene, cannot be described in words, how Bhismadeva, laying on the bed of arrows, the arrows were penetrating his body, going through his body. Obviously, he was feeling much pain, but still, he tolerated the pain in order to give instructions to Yudhisthira. And he didn't want to leave the body at the time that it was. This was towards the end of the month of December. And so he wanted to leave at the time of Makara Sankranti, where the sun reaches the northern hemisphere. It's a very auspicious day. So he waited for that time, and then during those 18 days, he gave instructions and darshan. During that time, he was feeling very thirsty. And so Duryodhana came with some fresh, clear water to give it, but he refused. He didn't want to take anything from Duryodhana. And so Arjuna took the cue and fired an arrow into the ground, and a little spring popped up. And from that spring, he gave that water to Bhismadeva, and Bhismadeva accepted it from the loving hands of Arjuna. Again, why did this great personality, who was obviously a great devotee and very sympathetic to the Pandavas, why did he take the side of the Kurus, fighting against Krishna, fighting against the Pandavas? And the reason is, and this is the foundation for a very important principle in devotional service. And if you can remember this principle will make you fearless. It'll create fearlessness if you understand this principle deeply. And what is that principle? He wanted to show, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how great you are by material calculations and by material achievements, no matter who you are, if you are against Krishna, you lose. You lose. So that's a heralding statement for the devotees of the Lord. And therefore, the one who takes shelter of Krishna is always the gainer, always the victor. Ultimately, that means that the devotee will ultimately attain the shelter of Krishna and go back home, back to Godhead. If we have faith and stay with Krishna consciousness, despite whatever difficulties happen, whatever material threats come by way of the material energy, and there is so many difficulties that the material energy can impose upon anyone or even the collective group, still If one remains true to devotional service, stays fixed at the lotus feet of the Lord, and renders devotional service to, and has full faith that Rake Krishna More Krishna Rake, whatever Krishna, when Krishna wants to protect, no one can harm. And if Krishna doesn't give his protection, no amount of armies in the world can protect that person. So Bhismadeva proved that by his example, by accepting the side against Krishna to show the greatness of Krishna, the greatness of the devotees of Krishna, particularly the Pandavas in this particular case. And after his departure, again, he attained his position back in the heavenly planets as a great personality. He is known as one of the Mahajans, Mahajano Yena Katasa Panta, that one has to follow in the footsteps of the great souls in order to understand what is true religious principles. Religious principles are given throughout the Vedas, and religious principles are explained in different ways, but only those who take shelter of a Mahajan can they understand what is eternal religious principles, those principles that are foundational and are never changed according to time, place, and circumstance. And so there are 12 Mahajans, and Bhismadeva is one of them. Brahma is one, Shiva is one, Narada, the Kumaras, Prahlad Maharaj, Janaka Maharaj, who else? Janaka Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Yamaraj, Sukadev Goswami. There are 12 personalities. I must have left out a few there. There are also, if you can remember the ones I left out, who else? Bali Maharaj, yes, Bali Maharaj. Also,
Kapiladev.
Kapila, yes. So 12 Mahajans, and therefore in our execution of devotional service, we are connected with Lord Brahma. He is the head of our Sampradaya. So we are following in the footsteps of the teachings of Lord Sri Krishna, coming through the disciplic succession of Lord Brahma, through Madhvacharya, ultimately through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we are the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, like that. And so Bhismadeva, you can read in the Srimad Bhagavatam in that same chapter, in the very beginning of the chapter, one of the teachings that Bhismadeva gives to those who take shelter of him. And he has a series of principles that he teaches to his followers, like that. Each of the Mahajans teach pure religious principles in a slightly different way, but all with the ultimate goal of taking shelter at the Supreme Lord's lotus feet in devotion. So this is a little of the wonderful life, glorious life of Grandfather Bhismadeva. The 9th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th chapter, first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam describes in detail the entire pastime of Bhismadeva. In the Puranas, you can find a little bit about the history, and if you listen to Srila Prabhupada, he speaks at least 3 or 4 times about Shantanu and Devavrata and Bhismadeva and how that all unfolded at the beginning of the life of Bhismadeva. Okay, so ultimately, everything is there in the Bhagavatam To learn the life of the great souls means to actually receive the special mercy of the Lord and to learn their teachings and how we can use their teachings in the application of our execution of devotional service. They are teachers, and they are the best of the teachers. And the teachings that Bhismadeva gave to Yudhisthira in those last 18 days were written in a book produced by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. He wrote 2 books. One is Leadership 1, and the second one is Leadership 2. In Leadership 2, you'll find all of those instructions given by Bhismadeva to King Yudhisthira on how to govern from the position of an emperor. Okay, thank you very much, and perhaps we'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj, for the very wonderful class and reminding us about the glories of Sri Bhismadeva. Thank you so much. And dear devotees, if you have any questions or comments or realizations, you can please go ahead and please turn on your cameras if possible. Thank you.
Even if it's not possible, turn on your cameras anyway.
Guru Maharaj, I have a question. Sri Bhismadeva gave Vishnu Sahasranama, and usually in since childhood, I heard that on Bhishma Ekadasi, the Vishnu Sahasranama was given to the audience, and so Bhismastami, Bhishma Ekadasi comes after Bhismastami. So is this day the departure of Lord Bhismadeva, or he is on the bed of arrows on this day? So I was just confused.
When is the Bhishma Ekadasi? Because I don't know of any Ekadasi that's named like that.
Yeah, it's like 12th of February, this 4 days after this Bhismastami.
Oh, it's the next Ekadasi then.
Yeah, next Ekadasi is.
Okay, so Makara Sankranti comes around the 14th or 15th, usually the 15th of January.
Yes,
so that is the departure time of Bhismadeva. And that's very auspicious. So he left as soon as the sun went into the northern hemisphere. It says that for yogis, they always try to leave their body when the sun is in the northern hemisphere. And that way, the advantage of attaining the higher realms becomes greater. If they leave in the southern, then it's unlikely they will attain the higher realms. This is for yogis. But so Bhismadeva followed that. But he used the time to instruct Yudhisthira and to give his darshan, because when you read, you'll find that so many great personalities came to see him during that time. Krishna, Vyasadeva was there, all of the Pandavas were there, and many other great saints. I think even Narada Muni came. So many persons wanted to meet this great personality in his final days. So yeah, so obviously he left before that.
Sri Devi Mataji is mentioning that it's Bhaimi Ekadasi, not Bhishma Ekadasi.
That's what I never heard of Bhishma Ekadasi, so I'm not.
Yeah, usually, and since childhood, I heard that this one particular Ekadasi day, they chant Vishnu Sahasranama, which is given by Bhishma, And that was we were used to do that, Guru Maharaj. So that's why I got
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's probably done on that particular Kadasi, but it's not called Bhishma Kadasi. Yeah. Radha Vinodini.
Yes, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and all glories to you. Thank you very much. I very much like this topic actually of Bhismadeva, and I really understand how great personality he was. But at the same time, it's always so confusing for me that he was so strict about this vow he had, and it. In one sense, I understand the importance of vow, and I also understand that this is a pastime. But on the other hand, it feels that it caused so many difficulties for the whole kingdom, and even we see that it happened that even Krishna broke his vow when there was reasons. So I could you clarify this topic for me?
What is the clarification? You want to know why he
that
did? Why he
it's
did it?
That in every circumstances, even when it causes so many difficulties, one has to follow the vow he had, because
we are challenged a lot of times with our vows also. No illicit sex, no intoxication, no meat eating, no gambling. These vows we make at the time of initiation, many times we become challenged by friends, relatives, circumstances. But we say, no, I have made the vow, although it may be more practical to somehow or other circumvent my vow or find ways to not to follow it, still a devotee will keep his vow.
Yes, it's just how to say, his vow had effect on a whole kingdom. So I mean, following the four regulative principles, I have this feeling that this doesn't really cause any harm, and yeah.
Well, following the four regulative principles does cause harm if you don't follow it.
I mean, yeah,
it causes harm to you, and it causes harm to the spiritual master. Well, it's a limited harm, but not compared to what Bhishma did. But ultimately, when you look at it, it was glorious. He showed the glory of Lord Krishna. And at that time, there was a plot to destroy the Pandavas. And so that never happened because Krishna protected the Pandavas. So you might say, well, if Bhishma would have took the throne when his mother, and then he would have been the king. And he was actually destined to become the king, yeah?
Yeah, it just sounds more simple, but I know that the pastimes are a different topic. It's just I always fear that pastimes are also reasonable. So there is a reason behind everything. So that's why I'm just asking this.
But you can't say, well, if he didn't do it, it would be better, or what would be that logic that it's going to be better or going to be different.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just I just remember that there was also this that Yudhishthir Maharaj didn't want to lie, and in that case it was a problem that he didn't want to lie even when Krishna asked him. So
in Kali Yuga, people have no character because they don't follow a certain value system. Therefore, a value system will always be broken down by circumstance, because people in this age can't follow vows or make promises. So whatever will fulfill their immediate needs, people will give up their promises and vows. They decide to get married. They get married before the priest. They get married before, the fire sacrifice, and they promise lifelong. But when it comes to circumstances, everything changes. This is Kali Yuga. People can't even follow their, any kind of simple vows now, because they have no character. They have no, So a person of character will give up their life before they give up their vow. And Bhismadeva understood for a Kshatriya, it was most condemnable. He said that to his mother, his stepmother, Vegavati. And she could understand that after hearing from him that she didn't push it. She could have came up with the same reasons that you came up with. But she didn't. She understood he wasn't gonna change. He was determined. And he gave many reasons. He didn't just say no. He said, this is the reason why. Krishna told Arjuna, that for a Kshatriya not to perform his duty is worse than death. It's better you die on the battlefield and attain the higher realms than refuse to fight based on, materialistic situation. Krishna condemned Arjuna's sentiment looking at things. Arjuna didn't even want to fight. And Krishna gave, he said, Asocham atpasocham stvam pratyavaram yavasase katasam zakudatsam chan nanu shochandi panditaha. Arjuna, you're speaking so nicely, but I must say you are a fool. Called him a fool for your lamenting for something that is not lamentable.
It's so interesting because as you told all this, and you mentioned that in Kali Yuga we have no value system, and I just have this idea that probably it's because we don't have real culture. This is why it's even so difficult to understand for me these basics. So it's a bit frightening that how much it affects our daily life, and this lack of value system, that we think that we know what is ethic, but actually we don't. So
one who lives by truth lives. One who lives by convenience dies many times.
Thank you very much for clarifying it.
Yeah, there's an old saying, if you don't have anything, if you don't have something to die for, you have nothing to live for. It's true. If you don't have something to die for, you have nothing to live for.
Yeah.
So we would rather die than give up our Krishna consciousness or give up our service to the Lord. That's our connection with values.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was really helpful.
Hare Krishna.
Namrata Mataji, you want to go ahead?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisance. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So I just wanted to clarify that Bhismadeva was the incarnation of Vasus. Am I right?
No, he was a Vasu. He just fell to the earth because of the offense, and he took another. He wasn't an incarnation or an expansion. He was a Vasu, but he came to the earth in another physical form to get the reaction of his punishment for the offense he had committed.
Okay.
Hmm.
So there were 8 Vasus. All of them created the offense, or just one Vasu created the offense?
It's mentioned that one, his name was Dyu, D-Y-U, which later became Bhishma in the material world. He was the one that instigated. They were all together. He was the one that spoke the offense, but they were all together. It was like, it's more like you'd see when a group of people do something wrong, everyone's implicated, but one person is the initiator of the whole thing. So he was the initiator of the offense.
Okay.
Vashishta Muni pointed that out and he said when they all pleaded for forgiveness, he said, yeah, all right, you won't have to take birth more than 1 year. You can come back to the heavenly planets after 1 year for the 7 of them. But this one Diyu, he will have to stay and finish his life. He will have to live his life on the earthly planet. Your volume, your audio has gone off now.
Yeah, so I was just telling that. So that was Bhismadeva. Actually, this story was heard by me in an incomplete form, so I was just clarifying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a very interesting pastime. It shows the quality of allegiance to truth, to principle, to friends, family, and loved ones.
Okay, okay, thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Shri Devi Mataji.
Shri Devi.
Please accept my humble obeisances, dear Guru Maharaj. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to you, Guru Maharaj. This pastime of Bhismadeva is very, very instructive. And I'm very struck, especially by his terrible oath, from which he got that name also, Bhishma, of keeping his vow that he will never marry, he will remain celibate. And for a powerful Kshatriya, as Your Holiness mentioned, to take that vow is a really very, very difficult thing. This vow was actually, as Radha Vinodini pointed out, was challenged on so many occasions, but he still stayed firm to that vow. That pastime when Amba was rejected by Shalva and sent back, it's very harrowing when she's sent back and forth between the two princes. One prince sends her back, then Bhishma sends her back, then again she comes back. That description is really harrowing, her plight. And then she becomes so angry that she takes that vow that I will kill this person who has reduced me to this situation, and then prays to Shiva like that. But still, Bhishma stood firmly by his vow. And I think it's mentioned, or I think Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj has mentioned in one of the books, that celibacy brings a lot of power to the person who is practicing celibacy. So not only was he powerful, but he became even more powerful because of that vow. Is that correct?
Yeah, it says even for a materialist, if they're celibate their whole life, they can attain Brahmaloka. Celibacy is the greatest austerity. True, real celibacy. Yeah, one becomes powerful.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Yeah.
And real celibacy means in thought, words, and deeds, not just refraining from action, but even in thoughts, even in words, is real celibacy. Is that correct?
There is a broad category of principles that make up what is actual real celibacy. the example in our tradition is Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. He was so powerful, and he followed that strictly in all aspects. That's why he became so powerful, such a powerful acharya. His mind was so clear that he remembered everything he ever read or heard. That's another feature of celibacy. It brings about great amounts of memory. If you want your memory to increase, that austerity is the main thing. Memories become sharper, memories become more clear. Because in this age, 4 defects are imposed upon the living entities is due to Kali Yuga. One is duration of life is reduced, mercifulness is reduced, bodily strength is reduced, and memory is reduced. These 4 things are reduced by this age. So by becoming celibate, bodily strength will be less reduced, and also memory will be less reduced, duration of life will be less reduced, and obviously mercifulness is a spiritual quality. And celibacy will help to overcome some of the defects of Kali Yuga. Well, one can be celibate even in Grihastha life if they follow the principles strictly. Just like I could tell you a little funny anecdote. Many years ago, I was organizing a brahmachari retreat. That was back in the year 2008, 2009. We were advertising for brahmacharis to come. We were having brahmachari retreats. We did for 4 years, actually. And in my advertising, I mentioned the word celibacy as the qualification for attending the retreat. And I got many ladies said they wanted to join the retreat. And they said, we're also celibate. Celibate in the sense that they were married, but they were following the principles of celibacy within their married lives. And so I had to change the wording in order for me to actually advertise correctly. So I had to just make it a brahmachari retreat instead of, for those who are celibate. And they were right. I was using the word in a limited way, and they were giving me a clear understanding of the actual meaning. And so, yeah. So celibacy is there in household. Prabhupada said, if one follows strictly in household life celibacy, they are just as good as a sannyasi. But then again, it's questionable. Okay, Parama Karuna Nitai.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to you. Guru Maharaj.
Nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Guru Maharaj, I have this question about what, the Bhishma Panchaka, which comes in the last 5 days of Kartik. How is that related to Bhishma and his departure? I'm a little confused. I think, did Bhishma depart after the Makar Sankrant, and then this Bhishma Panchaka comes in the last 5 days of Kartik, which is maybe few months.
It's not the same. Bhishma Panchaka is just a particular type of austerity one performs during the month of I think what is the purpose of that particular austerity is, of course, you simply refrained from eating anything but fruit for 5 days. But it's not related to Bhismadev's austerities before leaving the body. It has nothing to do with that. It's just connected to Bhismadev for some reason. I'm not really clear why, unless somebody else knows. I think we discussed this once before. People were saying were those 5 days included within that 18 days? No, they weren't.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. This is the time frame is different, but
Yeah.
as you say,
It's not related to his departure as well.
Okay. Thank you, Guru Maharaj. That helps.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Guru Maharaj, I just searched up about Bhaimi Ekadasi and Bhishma Ekadasi, and actually it's observed as Bhishma Ekadasi in parts of South India, in Andhra Pradesh especially. But it is called as Jaya Ekadasi or Bhaimi Ekadasi in the North Indian parts of northern part of India. They are observed.
Yeah, so that's where you're from.
Yes, Guru Maharaj. That's why I know that.
Yeah, Kadasis have 2 and 3 names. Some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them have 2 names. Some of them have 3 names.
Yeah. So, dear devotees, any more questions or comments or realizations? Sridevi Mataji, you want to ask anything?
Well, I just wanted to, if I may, I just looked this up on ISKCON Desire Tree, and it says that Lord Krishna became very pleased with Bhismadev, and he agreed to give pure love to those souls who chant, sing, hear, read, and worship and fast for these 5 days of Bhishma Panchaka. That's
Nice.
what I read on ISKCON Desire Tree.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so tomorrow is the disappearance day of Madhvacharya, the great Madhvacharya, who headquarters he's actually the son of the wind god. He's also the brother of Bhima. There are 3 brothers, Hanuman, Madhvacharya, and Bhima. They're all sons of the wind god. Madhvacharya was very powerful physically and also a great spiritual proponent. And we're actually part of his sampradaya, or he's part of Brahma Sampradaya, which we are also of the same. So it'll be tomorrow's discussion on Madhvacharya.
Sure, Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much. Thank you
Okay,
for the
thank
wonderful
you.
class.
My obeisances to all the devotees. Hare Krishna, Vanchakalpatam Vischa, Kripasinu Vevacha, Tikaram, Avnigo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Gaur Bhaktavinda ki jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Have a wonderful day. There is Brinda Devi. Oh, she's appearing. Brenda, you're getting big. That's Anasuya's daughter, Brenda. Anasuya and Parma Karuna Nitai.